In the early days of Jesus' ministry, he engaged in an intense spiritual battle with Satan. As recorded in Matthew chapter 4, the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness for 40 days of fasting. At his weakest moment, Satan came to tempt him. Yet Jesus used the Word of God as his weapon and defeated Satan's temptations one by one. Then Jesus continued to attack Satan's two main strongholds. The first stronghold was the spiritual realm. By casting out demons and healing the demon-possessed, Jesus demonstrated his authority over evil spirits. Matthew's Gospel records many instances of Jesus triumphing over demons. Each exorcism revealed that the power of God's kingdom had come to earth. The second stronghold was the realm of disease. Jesus healed the paralyzed, made the blind see, and the deaf hear. His healing miracles not only brought physical recovery, but also showed his authority to forgive sins. However, in this series of spiritual battles, a thought-provoking event occurred. It was the strange confrontation between Jesus and the legion of demons in the region of Gadarenes. After the miracle of calming the storm, Jesus and his disciples sailed across the Sea of Galilee. They arrived at the eastern shore in the region of the Gadarenes. This was the Decapolis area, mainly inhabited by Gentiles. It had a culture and way of life vastly different from the Jewish regions. The land was dotted with Greek-style cities, filled with the atmosphere of pagan worship. Here you could see idols and altars that were taboo to the Jews. The most obvious feature was that people everywhere raised herds of pigs. This was considered unclean in the eyes of Jews, who strictly observed the law of Moses. When Jesus first set foot on this Gentile land, a shocking scene unfolded before their eyes. Two demon-possessed men came out from the tombs. Their condition was horrifying, making everyone in the region tremble with fear. These two men chose to dwell among the dead, wandering between gloomy tombs and dark caves. Their strength was astounding. No one could subdue them. Local people had tried many times to bind them with the thickest chains and heaviest shackles, but they would easily break the chains and shatter the shackles, as effortlessly as wild beasts breaking free from their cages. They had completely lost their humanity, becoming the nightmare of this land. Day and night they would cry out terribly among the tombs and hills, cutting themselves with sharp stones, their bodies covered in wounds. Their violent tendencies made this necessary path a forbidden zone. No one dared to pass that way. Even the bravest would take a detour, fearing an encounter. Such a terrifying sight revealed the cruelty of evil forces. Yet more surprisingly, when these two demon-possessed men saw Jesus from afar, their reaction was completely different from usual. Instead of attacking violently, as they normally would, they seemed to be subdued by some invisible force. They ran and fell down before Jesus, showing unprecedented reverence. The words from their mouths were even more shocking. These words revealed the demons' accurate knowledge of Jesus' identity. They cried out, saying, "Jesus, Son of the Most High God, what do you want with us? Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" This recognition even surpassed that of Jesus' disciples at the time, because it wasn't until much later that the disciples truly recognized Jesus' identity. When Jesus asked their name, he received an even more shocking answer. "Our name is Legion, for we are many." This answer revealed how many demons were tormenting these men. Mark's Gospel specifically records that about 2,000 demons were occupying them. Though these demons were usually fierce and dominant, terrorizing people, before Jesus, they showed unprecedented fear and submission. They recognized Jesus as the Son of God, the Lord who would judge them. This recognition even exceeded that of Jesus' disciples at the time. However, this recognition wasn't born from faith and love, but from fear and dread of the coming judgment. This is exactly what James writes: demons believe in God and shudder. In this strange confrontation, the demons made an unexpected request. They saw a large herd of pigs feeding on the nearby hillside. They begged Jesus, If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs." This request reflected the demons' cunning and craftiness. They knew they had no power to resist Jesus, but they still wanted to use this opportunity to continue their evil work in this world. Jesus' response to this request was even more thought-provoking. He said just one word, "Go." Behind this brief permission lay profound wisdom. First, it allowed the demon-possessed men to be completely set free. Years of bondage were broken in an instant. Their spirits experienced unprecedented freedom. The voices that had tormented them disappeared. The urges that drove them to self-harm subsided. They finally became themselves again. Second, pigs were unclean animals under Jewish law. They seemed the perfect vessels for unclean spirits. This also revealed the nature of demons. They have a natural connection with unclean things, as Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. "Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs." Third, this permission would not change the demons' final destiny. They would still face eternal punishment on Judgment Day. This demonstrated God's wisdom and sovereignty. Even temporary concession would not affect the final righteous judgment. However, what happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. The moment the demons entered the herd of pigs, the entire herd rushed down the steep bank and drowned in the Sea of Galilee. What an astounding sight! 2,000 pigs at the same moment, as if driven by some mad force, rushed toward their own death. This was a shocking economic loss, and a perfect demonstration of the demon's destructive nature. The pig herders who witnessed this fled in terror. They ran into town telling everyone what they had seen, including how the 2 demon-possessed men were healed, and how the herd of pigs drowned in the sea. Soon the whole town came out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the 2 men who had been violent, now sitting quietly clothed and in their right mind. This should have been a cause for celebration. An even greater miracle was unfolding before their eyes. Those who had once been uncontrollable were now gentle and peaceful. Those who had once harmed themselves had now regained their sanity. Yet their hearts were filled with fear, not reverence for God, but worry about further losses. They saw not the glory of the miracle, but the loss of economic interests. Finally, they made a regrettable decision. They begged Jesus to leave their region. This decision reflected human weakness. They preferred to coexist with demons rather than accept the changes that God's presence would bring. In this dramatic event, the demons showed amazing insight into spiritual matters. They knew a profound eternal truth, that at the end of history, final judgment awaited them. They asked Jesus, "Have you come to torture us before the appointed time?" This question showed they clearly knew their destiny and recognized Jesus as the Lord, who would execute judgment. This recognition reveals an important spiritual reality. Jesus' ministry on earth was not just about the present, but pointed to the coming kingdom. This was like an encounter in a great war, though the final victory was yet to come. Each victory signaled the decline of dark powers. Every exorcism was a sign of the kingdom's nearness, announcing that Satan's power was being broken. Like a fortress falling one stronghold at a time, Satan's rule on earth was crumbling when the demons begged to enter the pigs. Jesus' permission seemed simple, yet was full of wisdom. This contrasted sharply with his response to Satan's temptations in the wilderness. In the wilderness, Satan tried to tempt Jesus to disobey God's will, to throw himself down from the temple to prove his identity, to receive the kingdoms of the world in exchange for worship, to turn stones into bread to satisfy physical needs. All these temptations pointed to one core issue, wanting Jesus to demonstrate his identity and power inappropriately, to bypass the way of the cross, to seek an easier path. Jesus rejected these temptations without hesitation, because obedience to the Father's will was central to his life. But in Gadarenes, the demon's request contained no temptation. It would not cause Jesus to disobey the Father's will. Instead, it would fulfill God's plan. This shows us Jesus' wisdom in action. He didn't handle every situation mechanically, but made appropriate decisions based on specific circumstances, like a skilled general, knowing when to attack and when to maneuver. The result of the demons entering the pigs revealed their true nature. They remained destroyers and devastators, even when given temporary shelter. They caused maximum destruction on their way out. This confirmed Jesus' teaching. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Their nature is opposed to life, opposed to creation, opposed to all that is good. Yet all of this happened under God's sovereignty and had spiritual significance. As the book of Job says, without God's permission, Satan could not touch even a hair on Job's head. In this spiritual battle, every detail was under God's control. The demon's request to enter the pigs contained deep spiritual meaning. In Jewish tradition, pigs were unclean animals. The law of Moses explicitly forbade eating pork. This wasn't just about hygiene and health. It was a spiritual symbol, showing that God's people should be set apart from the Gentiles. Thus, in Jewish thinking, pigs and demons belonged to the same category, both representing uncleanness and defilement, both standing in opposition to God's holiness. The pig farm here was large-scale and professionally managed. The herd numbered about 2,000, representing enormous economic value. At the market prices of that time, it was an astounding fortune. The demon's choice to enter the pigs wasn't just about finding a dwelling place. They had more sinister purposes. First, they wanted to destroy God's created life. This was consistent with their usual behavior, just as they had done to the demon-possessed men, constantly destroying the body and tormenting the spirit, driving people to self-harm and lose their sanity. Now they wanted to extend this destruction to animals, revealing their hatred for all life. Second, they wanted to incite local hostility toward Jesus. They knew human weakness well, knowing that huge economic losses would surely provoke public backlash. This was a carefully designed trap to shift people's attention from spiritual gain to material loss. Sure enough, the locals' reaction played right into their hands when people saw 2,000 pigs drown in the sea. Their fear overshadowed their amazement at the miracle. Their eyes were blinded, unable to see God's power manifested among them. They didn't see the joy of 2 men being set free, nor the testimony of Satan's power being defeated, but only saw the huge economic loss before them. This reaction reveals a common problem in human nature, often valuing immediate benefits over eternal values. As one Bible scholar said, throughout history, people have rejected Jesus because they value worldly interests more. This tendency hasn't changed from ancient times to now. Yet in this disappointing ending, there remained a ray of hope. It was the man, freed from the demon's power. When Jesus prepared to leave, he begged to follow Jesus. This longing showed a genuine inner transformation from demon-possessed violence to desiring to follow the Lord. What an amazing transformation! Though Jesus didn't grant his request, he gave him a special mission: to return home and tell what God had done. Thus he became the first gospel messenger in Gentile territory. His testimony prepared the way for the gospel's spread to the Gentiles. This was God's wonderful work. He could turn the devil's schemes into opportunities to expand the gospel. The story of the Gadarenes brings us profound spiritual lessons. First, concerning our attitude toward sin. Just as the locals had grown accustomed to the presence of the demon-possessed, we too often become comfortable living with sin. Even knowing certain things are harmful to us, we're unwilling to let God deal with them. We make excuses for sin, saying it's part of our culture, saying it's an unchangeable reality, saying it's necessary for survival, especially when removing sin comes at a cost. We often act like the Gadarenes, choosing to keep sin and ask God to leave. preferring to maintain superficial peace rather than experience complete transformation. This reminds us of Romans' teaching, do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may discern what is God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. This passage reminds us, change must begin with our mindset, begin with renewed values, begin with seeking God's will. Second, regarding the conflict between material and spiritual matters, the locals asked Jesus to leave because they lost their pigs. This choice has been repeated throughout history. People often make regrettable decisions between material interests and spiritual blessings. This is not just an isolated case, but reveals a deep problem in human nature. As Matthew's Gospel says, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. This principle still applies today. When faith conflicts with interests, our choices reveal our true inner condition. This story also foreshadowed the gospel's universality. Though Jesus initially preached to the Jews, he also came to Gentile regions. This anticipated Paul's declaration in Ephesians, Christ has broken down the dividing wall, so all who believe, regardless of race, can be reconciled to God. This truth still applies today. God's salvation is open to everyone, regardless of race, status, or background. The only barrier is the heart's resistance to God. This story also reminds us to examine our lives, review our priorities, reflect on our values. Are we, in some ways, demanding God to act according to our ways? Are we measuring spiritual things by worldly standards? Are we letting material losses hinder spiritual blessings? These questions deserve our deep reflection, for they concern our eternal welfare. Finally, let us consider a question. Have you ever felt God's presence in your life? How has He changed your values and life direction? Perhaps in life's valleys, perhaps in major decisions, perhaps in daily moments. Please share your experience in the comments below. Let us encourage and build up one another, and please subscribe to our channel to continue following more Bible story explanations. May God bless you. May you continue to experience God's presence and guidance as you study the Scriptures.